All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for making time to join us this afternoon. I know many of us are just wrapping up a school day, so it's a pretty long day, so we really appreciate you all being here. My name is Leah Plack, and I'm the communications coordinator for the Oregon Science Teachers Association. So you've probably heard from me if you've been getting our newsletter. And I'm here to welcome Dr. Okhee Lee, and she's going to be speaking with us about English learners in STEM subjects. And before we get started, I just want to spend a minute, since some of us may be new to using the Zoom platform, to just introduce a few features to you that you might want to use throughout the presentation. So one thing is everybody's automatically muted. So if there's a time where you would like to ask a question in a small group, we're going to have some time to talk, you may need to unmute yourself. So just remember that you are muted right now, and to be able to be heard, you would have to unmute yourself there. But we're going to ask you to stay muted for now, just because it really helps everybody hear, especially because we're expecting a pretty big audience this afternoon. And we ask everybody to turn on their camera so we can see you, because we really love to use this opportunity to get to know our colleagues across Oregon and beyond. So that's how you would do that, is pushing the button with the camera. And we're going to have a breakout room time for discussion. I don't anticipate anyone's going to need to share their screen today, but just so you know, that button is for sharing your screen so others can see something if you have a document or something like that. And then the chat, this button is one you may want to use to ask questions. So we're going to ask if you have questions, you can type them into the chat, and then we'll select a couple to address at the end. So please put them in the chat, and I'll do my best to get back to you. Or if you have a question or need some help with Zoom, you can leave a chat there too. And with that, I also want to make sure everybody knows that Dr. Lee is going to be our keynote speaker at our fall conference on science education in Eugene. So I hope, if you haven't heard about it yet, that you would check out the website, and there's information on how to register, and we have our session information there as well. And we look forward to seeing a lot of you there at Lane Community College on October 11th and 12th. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lee, and I know we're eager to get started. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that she may share her screen.
My turn. Okay. Screen. Share. And do you see?
We see.
We see, okay. And then that. So Leah, how are we doing?
Great.
Great. Hello, everybody. I am so delighted to be with you here today. I know that there are colleagues and friends from several years ago for some time. So I would like to say hello to everybody. I know Brad and Susan and others that I saw. Very good to be back to Oregon virtually. I would like to speak about the English learners in STEM subjects and approaches to reimagine. And I do know that the Oregon colleagues are very progressive, so I'm in good company of my colleagues and friends. Now, these are the topics that I would like to talk about. And then, so there are 3 sections. And after the first topic, there is going to be small group discussion. Second topic, there is going to be small group discussion. And third topic, there is going to be Q&A session before we say thank you and goodbye. So the current status of science education, and the second topic is English learners in STEM subjects transforming classrooms, schools, and lives. That's the National Academies of Sciences and Engineering and Medicine report. So you see science education, and then there is an English learner community. And then topic 3 is pulling topic 1 and topic 2 together in terms of what are the instructional strategies with English learners, but all students in science with language learning. So let's start with the first topic. Current status of science education, and that is my conversation in collaboration with Trish Shelton at NSTA. So where are we in science education? And before I say anything else, science education is in a very good place in terms of the vision. And I'm going to plead to you of what it is to implement the standards in the classrooms, current status. So I'm going to do a little bit of a memory lane of where science education has been. By the way, I hope that I'm speaking with you in plain English, not jargon-ish of big words. Okay. Science education from a historical perspective. Now you might remember science of process skills. And science of process skills include observations, descriptions, reporting, summarizing, and they came a little bit of a discrete process skills of kids are doing. Then you may remember hands-on science. So we are doing hands-on science and kids are very engaged. And some people did not quite appreciate hands-on science because hands-on science does not necessarily mean minds-on science. So let me go back again. Science of process skills might be around 1970s, several decades ago. Hands-on science, I would consider that around the 1980s. Then came minds-on science to complement, that would be about 1980s and maybe early 1990s. And then combining hands-on and minds-on science, you might remember, now that's a whole different story of a scientific method. By the way, there is a critique of a scientific method in framework document, at least in 3 places. So the notion is that there is no one scientific method in science education. There are multiple approaches to do. Now there is also another one, the critique of skills that we use. We don't use the skills because the skills are more discrete kinds of things, but we would like to use more mental abilities. So that's another critique in the framework document. And then you might remember science inquiry, which was based on the National Science Education Standards in 1996. I hope that you smile thinking about science inquiry. And the critique of a science inquiry is that it's great, but science inquiry is a little bit like an elephant to everybody, and nobody knew exactly what it was, and it's ambiguous and nebulous. So came the science and engineering practices. Science inquiry was the 1990s, and if anyone says a science and engineering practices as a part of the 3-dimensional learning, you open your arms and say, welcome to 2010. So that's where we are in terms of a memory lane. Carolyn, thank you for nodding. I see your screen. Okay, so that's the memory lane of a historical perspective. Now I would like to say a little bit about the research, practice, and policy with all students, and that is a before and after. Now I can say before and after from my personal experience because I was actually doing before the research, before the framework and the NGSS, and after. And I see such a drastic difference between before and after. So I would like to share some thoughts about what do we mean by before the framework and NGSS and after. Now, the current standards, I would consider to have 3 key features that make the current standards very unique and special. One is that even the science standards are policy initiative. You may remember the Science for All Americans, and then benchmarks for science literacy, and the National Science Education Standards in 1990s and the framework. These are standards documents in terms of a policy initiative. But those standards documents as a policy initiative are based on research literature, starting from how people learn. America's Lab Report, I do know because I was a committee member for the Taking Science to School, and that's when I met the Helen Quinn, the framework document chair. So you can imagine that he started more than a decade ago, and Ready, Set, Science is for the practitioners and learning science in informal. So right now, standards documents as a policy are based on research literature, not politics or policy, research literature. Now, the second feature is that research policy and practice. And this, I hope that you will smile, and before and after. Before the framework and the NGSS, research policy and practice were not working together or not trusting each other. The C research will say, we are doing project-based learning, we are doing problem-based learning, and then policy will say that here is a list of standards that kids must learn and they should be tested. And the classrooms will say, it doesn't make any sense, but I have to teach the standards because I'm being tested. So it wasn't really trusting one another. But after, Carolyn, thank you for smiling. You're my anchor. I know we didn't trust each other. This time, we are all speaking the same language. That here is a framework based on policy, that's based on the research, going into policy, and NSTA as the practice organization has been the beginning of the framework and the NGSS. So research and policy and practice are in harmony, working together. And I think that is really remarkable because we didn't have the history of these three entities working in synergy. Now, the third feature, which I consider as the most important, is the fact that these are all standards for all students. So here is the story. When the NGSS was released in 2013, that was the year, according to Every Student Succeed Act of the accountability groups, that was the year where poverty students flipped. That was the majority. Also, 2013 was the year where the racial and ethnic minorities groups became the majority. Since then, it's almost like a coincidentally that science standards, NGSS, and the flipping of student population where the traditional minority became the majority happened about the same time. And then children with the disabilities and English learners right now, it's about the 10%, which make up about the 5 million students. So we can see that these are all standards, all students. Here is a feature 3. So what does it mean when we say all standards and all students? We think of instructional shifts from left to right, where some people may use a seismic change, where it's so violently shaking that some people may fall into the gaps. The way I think of it is, it's a little bit like a flip for me. How? Traditionally, scientists and science teachers define that this is a science content. And I say, here is the knowledge of my discipline. And that is put in science textbooks because the kids have to know the content. And it goes to the kids, and kids, you learn what's in the books. Some kids who are lucky will do the science investigations. So I put down some students. Some students get it and they become scientists and engineers. But most students will say, I don't understand what I'm doing in science. Why are you doing science? Because of my teachers say so, even though I don't understand. Now, those are some students are typically the minority students. This time, it's all students because all students are the minority students traditionally are the majority right now. Students are like scientists making sense of a phenomena, but designing solutions to problems, and students are the scientists and engineers. So you can see the complete flip of not because my teachers say so, but because I'm trying to figure out why something happens by investigating and figuring things out. So I consider that as a flip upside down. Right. Now, I think those are 3 features of the fact that standards are based on strong research literature, the fact that standards, what's the second part? Standards that strong. There is a synergy between policy, research, and practice. And the fact that standards are intended for all students, that might explain the adoption process right now. Oregon is one of the early adopters. Now, I was a member of the NGSS writing team, and I actually had the honor of leading the NGSS diversity and equity team by working with really committed six members of the NGSS writers for a couple of years. So we are very proud of the work that we have done. And when, all right, I'm not going to. I thought that when first the state adopted, and Oregon was one of the first, and then it kept going, and 10 states adopted, and I thought, oh, that's pretty good. 20 states adopted, and I said, I think that it's going to be the maximum. You know, the number of states that adopted the NGSS or developed their own standards based on the framework, it kept going. 25, 30, 35, it kept going. We have 50 states in the US right now, 44 states and DC either adopted or adapted the NGSS and framework. And I think that is incredible. Incredible, state by state. What is incredible about it? We all know that we don't have a very strong instructional materials. We struggle. We all know that we don't have assessment instruments or the assessment systems, and we struggle. And we are concerned that the education system may or may not have the capacity to implement this initiative. We are all aware. Despite the challenges of a lack of curriculum materials, assessment instruments, and the capacity of education system, states keep adopting. And I think that is so incredible because there is a value in it. So where we are, and this is where we are going to have a discussion soon. Okay, when I think about the NGSS, starting from the framework and then studying based on the research literature, I think of our current initiative as relay of runners. Just think about relay. Okay. So here is the research literature based on the previous research literature. And then the baton goes from this runner to the standards. The standards were written by 41 members, and most of them were practitioners in the classrooms and state and the district. So the runner of the standards writers were running, taking the baton, while the committee members here were cheering up, go, go, and give water. This is where I was. So I felt very strongly supported. The thing that to me is really important is that there is a next runner. So state had about a state, 44 states and DC adopted NGSS and framework. And here is the final runner of the relay. You know that we keep the final runner who is the best to go to the finish line strong. If we think that these are successes, the real success is the final runner who take the baton and go to the finish line. And guess who are the people doing this work? Carolyn, please nod. Yeah, here is, especially because we don't really have a strong curriculum materials or assessments, we are lacking. And here you are. I cannot emphasize enough of, so we all cheer you up. Give water. By the side, go. Okay. So here is the first small group discussion, Leah.
Okay, so I'm going to be putting everybody into breakout groups. So you'll be seeing an invitation to join. It's about 4 people per group. For a small number of people, I'm going to keep you right here in the main session. So you will not get an invitation. So I'm going to open the rooms, and then I'll be broadcasting the prompt to all of the rooms because you won't be able to see the screen once you accept the invitation.
And we are going to for about 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, is everybody in small groups?
They should be in their rooms now. I'm going to broadcast it one more time to catch those last few people. And then we have a small group here who I kept in the main session because we are recording the session, and I like to have a little bit of the conversation and recording as well for folks who are going to watch it later.
I guess I'm in this small group.
Hi, Susan.
Hi.
Hi, Susan.
Hello, everyone.
Well, I've been thinking about this because I got to see these prompts ahead of time. So I can share a couple of my thoughts and then someone else can take it from there. My thought was, I mean, as Okhee said, the practitioners are really like finishing the race. And so if they're not on board with everything that's happening, or the communication isn't clear to them, like this change will not happen because it's really in their hands, right? It's in our hands in the classroom. And so to me, I feel like it's both the practitioner finishing the race and doing that work, which we know is really hard work, but it's also the need for that clear communication from research and policy that is informing what practitioners need to do in the classroom. And those both have to be happening for this whole process to be successful. So that was my thought.
And what I also see with the practitioners is they're the ones who are making it happen with the students, and without them, I mean, they're the implementers of the research and the policy. And I think when we see as practitioners become more expert in their understanding of the instructional shifts, they're actually seeing those changes that we want to see where all students are participating in science. So they're the ones that are helping us meet that goal, which sometimes means they're writing curriculum, they're trying new things, they're going to conferences to expand their learning, connecting with others. So those are my thoughts.
Well, I think the role of practitioners is going to become more of a mentor type. This experience I'm finding is I have various levels of students in the science area, and they come and go at such a high turnover rate. They start mid-year, they leave early, so they can't really hand wave, so to speak. Even lab opportunities differ between students. So I see us becoming more and more a mentor. And I still have small classes, like 10, 15, not 36 or so.
Where are you teaching?
I teach in Washington State at Green Hill Academic School.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I think I see, can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
I see in the elementary level is finding the time and having a hard time integrating science into all subjects because we have such a rigid, like reading the walk to read we have here in Tiger Tualatin, that I think it would be easier, I hate that word, but easier to integrate science if we had more flexibility in our reading time, because we could integrate the science into those stories as prep and then do the hands-on stuff and then do projects that we have, the kids ask a question and then we can do the projects later to solve that question. So I think a little more support that way and trying to figure out, fit it into the schedule is one of our biggest concerns.
We are going to be addressing that in our next newsletter, actually, that very issue.
Great.
All right. Okhee, would you like me to bring people back into our main session?
Hi, Brett.
At Bradford. Hi, Bradford.
Yes, let's do that.
Okay. I'll close our breakout rooms. Everybody will be joining us, and they have 60 seconds to come back.
Aha.
which is a nice feature. So it doesn't just yank everybody out right at once.
Okay. Leah, am I continuing? Do I continue?
I would give it just a minute, and I'll let you know when everybody is back.
Okay.
So we've got about 30 seconds till all the rooms will be closed.
Yeah, the capacity of education system is a real concern. There is an individual and there is a system.
Mhm. I know we all struggle with getting that elementary science piece because the system doesn't seem to be really supporting time for science yet.
Yeah,
Very frustrating.
yeah.
And I feel like it's also an instructional materials issue because elementary teachers really need integrated curriculum, and there isn't one that's out there right now. So that is a huge struggle as well. Okay, I think we're all back now.
Okay, I would say that, thank you for the small group discussion. I would say that the main message of the science standards is that we are in a very good place in terms of the vision. The task that lies ahead of us, implementation and the education system. And that's why it's in your hands, in a sense. I know that your hands are tied, but so we are all working together. It's really exciting that scientists and people with the research and policy and practice are all speaking the same language, because it's really exciting. I'm really excited with my own work, and I keep thinking, I shouldn't be too excited about the standards. Oh, but it's really exciting. All right, here we go. I'm going to continue. Okay. So the second topic is English learners in STEM subjects and transforming classrooms, schools, and lives, National Academy of Science. And it came out October of 2018. And I'm reasonably familiar with this document because I was a member of the committee and I shaped the report a little bit. That's why I can say, right? So the scope. Here is English learners in KL population, but I would like to focus on the orange two bullets. Language STEM with English learners and promising approaches to support ELs in learning STEM subjects. And there are other topics, but so those are the two main bullets that I would like to focus on. And now I'm adding English learners in STEM subjects. I hope that you like the screen, that there is a framework and there is a NGSS, and now the NGSS and framework are made accessible to all students, including English learners. By the way, I just would like to point out that on the bottom, all three documents are available free online because these documents are supported by your taxpayers' money, so they are yours, no charge. Significance of report. This is English learners at the center, starting with who the English learners are. And I think this is really very important for STEM educators who may say, I do not know English learners and I do not know the L population, I don't know. So we are starting from who the English learners are. And then it integrates the language and STEM subjects in across all grade levels. Actually, this is the first report because when we do the English learners in subject areas, I do English learners in science, I do English learners in math, and but this time, I felt like that we were quarantined in a room from language STEM, because we didn't talk to one another. I did not know about engineering, and math people would not know about science. So we were, no, that's a strong word, but we were forced at the table and saying, you come up with a consensus report that all the 5 disciplines agreed on across K through 12. And so I learned tremendously by working with my colleagues across these different disciplines. These are contemporary views on language and STEM subjects and how children learn, all students, but these are contemporary views. And these are contemporary views that will make science educators in particular, but STEM educators are quite happy. And then here is an asset-based view. So what do we mean by that? One comment that a committee member made is that when we think about English learners, we always say support English learners and even protect English learners. But then we say these are academically rigorous standards that we are challenging. And someone said, why don't we say that we challenge English learners with academically rigorous standards? And I said, of course. If something is rigorous and challenging for all students, English learners should be challenged as well. So that's that nuance of what is asset-oriented. No, we are not simply protecting them because they are poor Okhee who does not speak English. No, smart Okhee who knows the science. That's a different view. So I just wanted to point that out. All right, so definition of English learners, and I would like to say a couple of things because you may say, oh, I did not know. What, you did not know? Here we go. Federal law defines English learners as 3 to 12 years old, enrolled in elementary and secondary. Native language is not English. Proficiency may limit. So there's a federal law defines. And then right now there are 10% of English learners, and that's about 5 million students. And you can point out Oregon and what is Oregon. And so you can see the percentage of English learners. By the way, this percentage and this number does not include students who exited the English language programs, but still need a support and challenge with academically rigorous standards. So that does not include, and that's a huge number. And then finally, now let me ask you the question. Do you think the majority of English learners were born in the US or came from other countries as new arrivals? We typically think of English learners as coming from different countries. Actually, the majority of English learners in the nation are US born. It's a very different connotation. They actually speak English as their language. They are English speakers. They are English users. They are not learning English as a new language. That means that they can participate. It's a whole different notion of English learners that we may not think about. Now, educational policies with the English learners and how the educational policies support or not support. And here is another set of policies that you may be a bit surprised. Here we go. Even the federal law has a definition of English learners that I just showed you. When that definition is implemented in states, there is no common definition of English learners across the states. States define differently. I could be an English learner in New York State, but I might not be an English learner in Oregon. Now there is no common approach to classifying and reclassifying English learners across the states and even across the districts within states. So that means whether, Mr. Holst, whether you're an English learner or not, classifying depends on the state, even district. And whether you are ready to go to the regular classroom depends on the state and depends on the district.
I get what I take.
All right. Okay. Now the third part, excluding recently proficient English learners from the L accountability group leads to an overestimation of academic achievement gaps in STEM between Ls and non-Ls and misperceptions of L's proficiency. English learners are not students with disabilities. It's a function that they are learning English as a new language. Once they are proficient, they exit the English language programs. So when we say achievement gap between Ls and non-Ls, it's only temporary. So what is important is that if you keep English learners too long in the program, it may prevent them from having access to STEM courses, and vice versa. So this is something that is very important about how do we define L. The reason why I would like to emphasize it, there is an EVER-L framework. So when you include English learners, not only those in the L program right now, but also students who exited and students who continue for 4 years after they exited. That's a federal law. We monitor students, English learners, 4 years after they exit the program. When you include all of them, the achievement gap is really very limited. Because once they are proficient in English, they can perform. So I consider that, it's an artificial categorization by excluding students who exit the English language program. You are overestimating the gap. The reason why I emphasize the EverL framework is because the people who do the work are Karen Thompson and Umansky, and they are the L scholars at Oregon State University and University of Oregon. You have experts who do the work on L classification and non-classification and achievement issues in your state. You're very progressive and you have the experts. And I hope that science educators and L educators collaborate given the expertise. Okay. The last one, there is no consensus on English language proficiency standards across the states. Now that may surprise you because we just said that in science there is a consensus on the framework and the science standards. And you say, there is no consensus on language proficiency standards across the states. Right now we have 6 states of proficiency standards, but those large states like California, Texas, and New York have their own standards. You may be part of Alpha 21, which I was a part of, but then there are WIDA states, and when you actually look at the English language proficiency standards, the ELP standards have a lot of limitations. The standards of philosophies else can do, but when you actually analyze, level 1 students cannot. That's the way it's written. So I wanted to just alert you of the limitations of English language proficiency standards. If I have another webinar, I'll be happy to go over, but it's limited. Now that it is an issue that there is no consensus because according to the federal law, it says English language proficiency standards should have 3 components. That it should address 4 domains of speaking, listening, and reading and writing. And when I see this one, and I say that ELP standards are limited because it has only the linguistic modalities. Do you see that it does not include non-linguistic modalities of tables, charts, and diagrams? For ELP standards, non-linguistic modalities that we consider critically important in science are not part of it. So you can see the limitation. Address different standards. And then it says that English language proficiency standards are aligned with content standards. So ELP standards are not just the English, the language. ELP standards should be aligned with content standards. What is interesting and important is that we don't say science standards are aligned with the ELP standards. Instead, ELP standards are aligned with the content standards. And that's the role of the content people to say that English learners are learning language. They also should be learning non-linguistic modalities, but they also should be learning content standards. And that is very important that we have not gotten to. So why is that important? You can see that this report is addressing what do we mean by English learners learning content standards, particularly STEM. So now that content standards are new, we, the science educators, have the task of implementing the framework in the NGSS. The same with the engineering standards. Now that content standards are different, then you can imagine that English language standards should be also different because it says ELP standards are aligned with. Now that academic standards in content areas are different, then ELP standards should be different, right? That's the logic. Then let's think about the approaches to Reimagine with English learners in content areas. And this is again, before and after. Traditional thinking and contemporary thinking. And I hope that you're going to nod and smile. That is my expectation. Here we go. Traditionally, we thought of a vocabulary as a precursor, a prerequisite. So though we do front loading and pre-teaching. I, having an accent, poor Okhee, who does not speak English, before she comes to science, she has to know the vocabulary. So we give the front loading of a vocabulary. You can imagine that I'm already scared that I don't speak English and I get this list of vocabulary terms that I have no clues about, and I'm really scared. And I don't even go to the content areas. Instead, the contemporary thinking is that language is a product, that you come to the science classroom, you use any means of a communication, you do science, and by doing science, you learn language to communicate your ideas, and then you learn language as a product. So it is not a prerequisite, and we don't do free teaching and front loading. We communicate in any means, and this is what this report says, that any means of a communication. The second important part is that we typically think of a disciplinary vocabulary as the language. So we do the vocabulary as a definitions. And literacy people think of a vocabulary as the foundation of a learning. Well, in science, knowing a list of a vocabulary means nothing. You may use molecules and atoms and all of those, but if you have a no meaning, it means nothing. And especially if you don't have any experience and no understanding, just the vocabulary terms are just a collection of facts, words. Instead, language is more than vocabulary and includes using language to engage in disciplinary practices. What does that mean? When students ask a question, they're using language. When students argue from evidence, they're using language. When they construct an explanation, they're using language. And they may not use a vocabulary, but they may still communicate their ideas as using the language. So it's a whole much more open thinking about that language, vocabulary is not language. Now, we tend to separate content objectives and language objectives. So when we used to do, here is a list of content objectives and here is a list of language objectives. And today when I teach about something, my language objectives, I'm going to teach past tense so that there are two sets of. Instead, what is the contemporary thinking? It's using language for functional use to do something. So suppose that you are doing an investigation and you ask the students, what will happen? Well, what tense would you use? Future. What are you doing and describe? What tense would you use? Present tense, because I'm doing it. Write a report about what you did. What tense would you use? I'm using past tense because it happened. So it's a functional use of a language, not as two sets of objectives. The last one, I think this is really the most important to me. Now, for Okhee again, she does not speak English, so I simplified language. And as I simplify language, I also simplify content. Here is a shocker. Science is all about the cause and effect. So if you say that something about cause because, if something happened because, it's a complex sentence. So for me, Okhee, you chop it and then you make it as two separate parts. Well, now I have two short sentences, but I have no clues about how these two short sentences are related to each other. So I have to do a whole lot more cognitive work by dealing with the shorter sentences. It's a contradiction, isn't it? If science is a cause and effect, keeps cause and effect as a complex sentence because that's a complete thought. So the contemporary thinking is that do not simplify language, which as a outcome, result is a simplifying content. Instead, keep the content, but use a language with a variety and amplify language, but keep the content. Don't simplify and make it easier. And this is all the debate about the level of the readers and all that. Just having that, we have a lower expectations for some and high expectations for others. And you do know where each belongs to. So here is a promising instructional strategies, and that's chapter 4. Here is something that you will really like. I know that when STEM educators come, they say, I don't know the L strategies. I know I heard about the sentence structure and word walls and sentence frames, but I don't know how to use them. If I use those strategies, is that sufficient? Well, remember that we are using functional use of a language to learn STEM. We are not learning language. We're using language to do. So the first thing as a strategy is a compelling phenomena. Does it sound familiar to you? Phenomena should be compelling to all students, including English learners. Yep, I'm not kidding. That report starts from there. How do I know? Because I was a part of writing the report. Kids are learning STEM. Engage students in disciplinary practices, so they are asking questions. Engage students in productive discourse and interactions, so they are using language in discourse, and they are interacting with others, with the teacher and students, so they're interacting. Then they go to about shift registers and multiple modalities. Now we are getting into language, and you say, I don't know the registers and I don't know the modalities, and that is okay because we are getting into language part right now. And then we say leverage multiple meaning making resources, and that's where we go of a home language and bilingual and translanguaging and gestures and all of those. And then here comes language. So the important part is that when we traditionally thought of STEM with English learners, we typically think of the language and back. Instead this time, we are using language to do STEM. And kids are used to figuring out by asking questions and arguing. And they engage in discourse by interacting with others. And then the language comes later. That we're using all means of a communication to engage all students, including Ls. So here is the question, and I'm going to stop. Leah, you take it.
Okay, I'm going to put us back in our breakout rooms, and I'll broadcast the prompt again for everybody. I hope that worked okay for everyone. So you'll see an invitation in just a moment.
And Leah, I may ask for about 4 minutes.
Okay.
I probably would say my approaches are not contemporary. The science teachers I PD with, they seem to be much more elementary with their approaches and not willing to modify if their kids happen to be ELs, or if their kids happen to be upper level math, or if the kids happen to be 2-3 years cognitive behind. And that's something I do every year. There's some kind of modification because the kids change every year for me. So I don't see this as a problem in my world, but I can understand seeing it in everybody else's world, which you guys all are. Feel free to ask me to explain.
The thing that I've noticed in our work here in the Portland metro area is that having that anchoring, compelling phenomenon drives students' curiosity and builds their engagement and the purpose for speaking. And it's just so critical that we feel like for elementary especially, it is something they personally can experience, hopefully in their schoolyard, or so that everybody kind of has access to that phenomenon, and then the activities that help them build understanding, a more complex understanding of that phenomenon over time?
I led a workshop for preschool teachers, and I had this experience talking with one of the teachers about this topic, and she was classified as an English learner. And she told me, you know, throughout school, people just treated me like I was stupid. Like that was her experience in school. And it really stuck with me that I think she was not engaged in the rigorous science ideas because of her classification, and she knew it. And it just broke my heart because I think this is true for so many students. And so I'm excited that this shift is happening because I think it is the just way forward for our kids.
Sandra, you're muted and you would like to say something.
Well, we're actually a group of 6 here in Hermiston, and we were having our own discussion, but I suppose one thing that's important is with the NGSS, the 5 E's of delivery, instruction, beginning with the phenomenon and the exploration first before we explain the things that kids are discovering, and let that curiosity build first before we get to the explanation of the content. And I think with ELs, that's especially important to give them the opportunity to discover and on their own first.
Yeah.
I'm a STEAM teacher here in my district, and I always start out the year with 3 by 5 card tower building, and I just hand them the cards and say, build the tallest tower you can. And I get so many blank looks when I do that, but after they try and I give hints, and then we talk about foundations, and then they work together to build taller towers and what they can do with 5. You can see the light bulbs go on after they've touched it, they've tried it, they've looked around to see what other people are doing, and then you can give them more information and they know what you're talking about.
Great.
I'm free to join in if there's anything you want to add to the conversation.
I think I'm going to close our rooms, but we have 60 more seconds to finish your ideas before everybody comes back.
The other thing I'm just going to add is that number 3, engaging students in productive discourse, like being very deliberate about providing multiple opportunities and levels of talk, and that kids learn language by talking and not being quiet. So having active classrooms where kids are exploring their world, phenomenon, activities, but talking about it, but with support. Like you're not, like we're helping them learn how to talk scientifically with each other.
Yeah.
We call that miles on the tongue here in our world. Kids have to be able to practice the language as it's related to the content to understand it.
Well, even
Yes.
diagrams and pictures too. It doesn't have to be all
Yeah.
spoken word.
All memes. Yeah, do we get together?
I think we're all coming back in right now.
Okay. So I don't have a lot of time. I was too excited. I may take a few minutes of your time. Am I ready?
Yep, go ahead.
So we are going to go to the third topic, and I would like to give you a warning that I was a bit too excited to talk a bit too long, so you may not have a chance to ask me questions. Strategies with English learners, and I'm going to give you, so here's a box of 3-1 when you have a chance to read the report, and I do know because this is my own research work with the NSF funding. So I would like to use an example of what it looks like. We're going back to phenomenon first and then engage practices and discourse. Here is the NSF project, and you may be familiar with Guadalupe Valdez and Helen Quinn. And here is the purpose is we are developing curriculum materials with a focus on English learners, and we have been doing the field testing for the past 3 years where students are doing garbage. wonderful garbage. And they are making landfill bottles. I can have another webinar on this. And actually this unit is going to be on the Achieve website soon, so you will see. All right, here we go. So storyline of the garbage unit is, as the students are beginning more sophisticated over time, language use becomes more sophisticated, and I'll give you the evidence of what I say. Okay. Here is a storyline of a students are sorting the garbage, and they're doing the already classification and patterns, and they are looking at the system of home garbage, school garbage, and neighborhood garbage. And they are building the landfill bottles, and you cannot keep the garbage in, so you have to keep. And then at some point, yikes, the smell from the closed system is so good. And then you measure the weight of a closed system when you open, and banana peels have disappeared and orange peels have disappeared. Or sometimes though there are condensation and water drops, and what happens? And kids, Susan, who is so smart, will say that no, the water came and the weight should be more. And I keep saying, no, close the same. And you'll see, I win, Susan, even though you're so articulate, but my idea has the merit. All right. So here's bacteria, and here is so we do the agar plate to find out what is causing the decomposition. And you can see that it's going into life science. And this is in the bundling of physical science and life science. All right, so here is cluster 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to talk about the smell, what happened to the garbage, and that's a particle nature of the matter. Now you could have done the perfume and all of that, but this is smell of garbage. Not kidding. All right, I did. So the first thing is here is what is the smell? That's a phenomenon. Sandra, thank you for smiling. I'm not kidding. They think it's the coolest thing. The smell is really bad, actually. So students it's a phenomenon. We got them. We hooked them. They are fascinated. All right. Then they engage in disparate practices of, it's the same. Do you see that? And they're doing the patterns, and they are doing looking at the properties of a matter. Doing science, they're actually using language because it's so essential. Just as someone said, okay, it's so essential. So that is a strategy too. Actually, they are using language, and it's a strategy, language strategy, as they are doing science. Practices are so important. And then strategy 3. I'm not talking about language strategies. I'm talking about using language to do science. Productive discourse that Susan, you're talking about. So you could say one to small group, one to many, and you use language in different ways because you use language in different settings. So if you're talking to a small group, I don't see it here because, my partner knows what I'm talking about. But if you're talking to the large group, you have to be very explicit. Actually, when you write a report, you have to be super explicit. When you write something for the public, you have to be. So it's using language in different ways. We already did 3 strategies: phenomenon, practices, and discourse. There comes then. Now you are really getting into language. This time we're getting into language. Now here's a yikes. Start with it stings, blow the nose. That's a communication. Ew, it stings. And then comes the role of the teacher. Is it smell something or nothing? Something. If it's something, is it solid or liquid? No. Is it gas? Perhaps it is a gas. Now, if it is a gas, why can't we see it? Why can't we? So they do the investigations to come up with ideas. The smell is a gas made of particles. When students have the experience and when students have the understanding, you just simply say, we call that particles. Are we cool? Cool. Because kids cannot keep saying that small things that make up all the time. So we say particles. Cool. Now, it's made of particles. How do I smell it? And then students will come up with the idea. The smell is a gas made of particles too small to see and moving freely in space. Are you cool? It takes about 2 weeks. Starting from EU, it stings to that. So it's called from everyday register to specialized register. About 2 weeks, starting from here to here, all students. Now you learn the register. That's it. Register. Then, so here is an example of Okhee. You must be kidding. But here is an example. Stay with me for about 3 minutes or 5 minutes. I know that I'm disrupting your dinner time, but you are so committed. Smell travels freely, and the wind helps it get more spread out. You can't see smell because its properties are too small to see. Language needs improvement, but are you happy with ideas?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. We said exactly what we just said of that. Okay, that's a register. Now let's think about then modalities. Modalities simply mean text, diagrams, symbols, tables, and graphs. And we first say draw smell, and some students may draw smell as a cloud floating. And then they realize it's not cloud, and possibly smell as a lines floating. And then through investigation, they learned that smell is made of particles. Now, these colors are not simply for pretty. Air particle is a blue, smell particles red. They mean colors mean something more than pretty. Now, these particles move freely, and that's what I smell from the open. And they eventually get to it. So you see that there is a writing, there is a diagram, there is a symbol that particles are moving freely, and there is a key. Now you may say, you make up, and here is a student work sample. In the beginning, how do we smell pizza? The students wrote a whole lot, pizza, fruit, trays. The lines are the smell. So the student thought that smell is a line that is floating and coming to me. After end of a class, student wrote that closed system. Banana smell and garbage smell. Arrows mean the movement of particles. They are particles. They are not lines. Particles are moving. Different types of particles, banana and orange. But spoon and aluminum foil stay the same. This is a fifth grade. It's a real. And they will do the diagram to say, once you open it, these particles will move freely and reach my nose. Sandra, I'm glad that you are appreciating the student work sample. So here is a multiple meaning making resources. Once the students have an understanding, then you can even reach out, use home language, use everyday language, use gestures, even use objects. You can do the translanguaging of going back and forth. You can even use a humor. When I talk to you, I try to use some humor, not to make it too boring. And there is a cultural ways of knowing. I use all means of a communication to make my communication to reach you as effectively as possible. And then comes this explicit focus on language. And this is really language part. And it's, you say, if you do not understand, that is okay. I'm going to skip this slide because we are really getting into linguistics. Used to be we start from here. No, it's the end. It's all right. So contemporary views, science, traditional views focus on individual learners learning the content because scientists discovered it, my science teachers say so. Contemporary, no, I'm making sense of phenomena and solutions because I am a scientist and I'm using knowledge to do. The same thing with the language. Traditionally, I learned the vocabulary and grammar, and I have to learn it in Rosetta Stone. Okay, one example, sorry about that for saying it, but it's a grammar. Now I'm using language because I wanted to explain what my garbage. I wanted to explain smell. So you're using language to do science. And you can see that the science and language are going together. And here is some readings. Again, the report is available free online, and we don't have time for questions and answers. Okay, maybe next time. And I would like to say thank you. And Leah, it's your turn.
Thank you all so much for being here. And we have an exit survey we would love you to fill out. And I know some of you are here with your PLC, so this is also how you can get your reimbursement for your snacks. And we have another webcast scheduled for October 16th with Andy Byerly from the Oregon Department of Education. We're going to be talking more about STEM, and this time we're going to be specifically focusing on math and science integration, which I know is a topic people have been asking for. And I do have a couple questions here that I will try to loop back with folks. Maybe I can chat with Okhee a little bit and get some answers, but thank you all so much for your participation, and we hope to see you at the conference where Dr. Lee will be back in Oregon in the flesh.
I hope that you would say thumb up. Science
be
educators
there.
have a lot to say. Don't yield.
Are we automatically registered for the next one, or do I have to do it again?
You would need to register again because it's a separate event, and it will have a different link next time for the Zoom meeting.
Will I get a generic email like this one?
Yes, I will send some emails out to let people know.
I will watch for that. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye, Susan. Bye-bye, Sandra.
Bye-bye, Okhee.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much. See
Thank
later. Thank you. Yeah, I will say stop share, and we are done.
Right. I will stop.
And you will have the PowerPoint.